What's up, everyone? This is how to run a sub 3 hour, 30-minute marathon. We're going to go over all the exact pacing strategies, workouts, tips, everything you need to smash that 3:30 barrier. But before we go too much further, be sure to hit that subscribe button, smash the thumbs up button, share this with all your friends, and in the comments down below, be sure to comment your marathon PR. Let's see what everyone's running. Let's see how fast you are, and let's see what goals that you're working towards. Also, in the description down below, there's a link that will take you to a special place where you can claim a training plan voucher. We'll talk more about that at the end of this video, but just know that it's in that description, so you're not going to want to miss this. So let's dive in. So to run a sub 3 hour, 30-minute marathon, let's talk about pacing first. So first and foremost, to run that kind of time, you're going to need to run 8 minutes, about 8 minutes per mile, or for our metric friends, about 4:59 per kilometer. Now, if you were to run perfectly even splits across this whole race, which is very hard to do that long of a race, but if you did, your 5K split would be about 24:53. Your 10K would be 49:46. You'd go through the half marathon point in about 1:44:59. And then you hit 25K, 30K, and by 40K, you'd be at about 3:19:03, give or take a little bit. Now, to run a sub 3:30 marathon, there are three components of your training plan that you're going to want to remember, and you're going to want to put every single week of that training block. So, first and foremost, you're going to want to focus a lot on easy runs. Now, the majority of your running for a marathon, and really any distance for that matter, should be focused on easy running. So, what is easy pace? So, easy pace is any pace that you can run that you can carry on a conversation without feeling winded. So, if you're running with somebody and you can carry a conversation back and forth, that is an easy pace for you. Now, if you want to put a pacing range on there, you really probably shouldn't be making your easy day any faster than 9 minutes per mile or about 5:36 per kilometer. Now, I understand people's easy paces vary from person to person, but just as kind of a broad generality, your easy pace should be no faster than about 9 minutes per mile or 5:36 per kilometer. Now, the second key training component for this 3:30 marathon are marathon pace workouts. Now, these marathon pace workouts can technically go in a few different parts of your weekly training. What I like to do is I like to keep them on one of 2 days and sometimes both days. And we'll talk about where those fit in the weekly calendar. But your marathon pace workouts should be around 8 minutes per mile. Obviously, if you're trying to run a 3:30 marathon, you want to be running 8 minutes per mile or 4:59 per kilometer, give or take a few seconds here and there. So if you want to have a little bit more wiggle room with that 3:30, run a little bit faster, maybe 7:50 to 7:55. That'll give you a little bit extra cushion as far as making sure you're under that 3:30. Now, the third component are threshold pace workouts. Now, this is really important for marathon training. A lot of times people think, oh, it's just a marathon. You just run easy the whole time. Not if you're not trained very well for it. So, threshold pace workouts, these are workouts that you can range anywhere from say about 15K to half marathon pace, maybe a little bit slower too. With the marathon, they get a little bit tricky as far as pinpointing an exact range. But for our purposes, we're going to say a threshold pace workout would be about 7:30 to 7:40 per mile, or about 4:40 to 4:47 per kilometer. Now, this pace is a little bit faster than your marathon pace. Remember, our marathon pace is 7:50 to 8 minutes per mile. So you're going to want to get used to running a little bit faster than marathon pace because that's going to help build up that lactic threshold. So when you are running at a certain pace for a long period of time, those levels of that lactic threshold will be a lot higher and you can tolerate what you're doing a lot easier. Now, I get asked a lot, what should weekly volume be? And there's a lot of different schools of thought with this. So let me just say it depends. I know that's not the answer you're looking for, but here's why. So, one thing that's really important to remember is how much experience you have. So, the number of years you've been running. If this is your first marathon versus your hundreds marathon, you've been able to handle the training loads a little differently. So number of years running is a major component with that. Another one, like I just said, is if it's your first marathon or your hundreds marathon. Another one that I think is overlooked is your average volume of mileage over the last 3 to 6 months or so. So if you've been injured for 6 months, you're not going to just hop in a plane and start doing 60, 70 miles a week. You're probably going to want to build up to a certain level. So you want to kind of look at that average volume over the last 6 months or so. Another really important one is injury history. So if you have a tendency to get injured when you start running a lot, that may be a component to think about as you're trying to figure out how much you should be running for a marathon, especially for a 3:30 marathon. Also, if you're recovering from an injury, that's also another thing to think about. Gender is another one. I've got males versus females. Our bodies adapt a little differently from person to person. And then the last one I think is kind of overlooked as well is how much grit do you have? How much mental fortitude do you have? Now, I say this because when you're training for a marathon, it is grueling. You're doing a lot of mileage, a lot of repetitive things week after week after week, and you spend a lot of time in the saddle running. So I'll say the marathon is not for the faint of heart. So if you are really strong mentally, you have a really deep mental fortitude, you're probably going to be able to handle a little bit more than someone who's maybe really timid and really scared of the distance. They probably won't be able to handle that same component. A large part of running is all mental. But my opinion for this particular time, so a 3:30 marathon, is I would say you'd want to run a minimum of 40 miles per week. Now, like I said, there's a lot of schools of thought, there's a lot of beliefs, of high mileage or low mileage or whatever. Listen, my opinion is a minimum of 40 miles a week. Now, I'm not saying you need to start at 40 miles a week. I'm not saying you need to finish at 40 miles a week. You can start a training block at 30 miles and you could finish averaging 50 miles a week. If you take that average over the course of the training plan, you'll still be at about 40 miles per week. So, my opinion for this distance is run about 40 miles per week average. Another question I get asked a lot is how many days a week should I be running? So, again, this depends, but realistically, for a marathon, you want to be able to spend a lot of time actually doing what you need to do to train for it, and that's run. You can't run a marathon without running. And so realistically, you need to be running at least 4 up to 6 days a week. If you want to do 7, great. Um, I don't know too many people that have that kind of time to be able to run 7 days a week. Plus, you want to think about things like recovery and rest and things like that. So I think 4 to 6 is a really good range for this particular distance and this particular time. Now, remember, consistency is what leads to gains. So you can run 4 days a week, but if you're doing it consistently, you could get to that time. It's going to take a little bit more. I mean, if you're only running 4 days, you'll need to make sure you're really focusing on quality and making sure you're not missing anything. But say you're running 5 or 6 days a week, if you could do that consistently week after week and keep your easy days easy and focus on your hard days, keeping them hard, you'll get the gains that you need to get. Now, how long should this training block be? Again, there's a lot of different schools of thought, but realistically, you're looking at 12 to 18 weeks. A lot of that depends on what kind of runner you are. If you're new to the distance, you're probably going to want a little bit more of a buildup. If you are used to it, you probably don't need as long of a buildup. So if you're already in some kind of marathon shape or you've already been running some kind of longer distance race, 12 to maybe 14 weeks is okay. Again, you're going to want to make sure you hit quality very hard. But if you're new to the distance, realistically, an 18-week training plan would be perfect for you. 16 to 18 weeks. Like I said, if you're not used to the distance, you're going to want to be able to spend time running, get used to that cumulative fatigue, get used to spending a lot of hours on your feet. When you're running 15, 16, 17, even up to 20 to 22 miles in a training run, that's going to take a little bit of time and you're going to be able to want to recover and bounce back before you do another long run. So, what should my weekly calendar look like? Now, what I typically recommend is having 3 areas of focus. One, you're going to want to have your long run, obviously. You're going to have a speed work day, and then everything else should be easy. Now, I put an asterisk next to that long run because sometimes, depending what you're doing during the week, that long run may be a speed workout, kind of hugged in there in the middle of a long run. But you want to have at least one long run, at least one speed day, and then everything else needs to be easy. So a sample weekly layout. So if you're running 4 to 6 days a week, this is kind of what you should be looking for. This is what I also recommend with all my athletes too. So I start my weeks on Monday. So Monday and Tuesday are going to be easy days. You're going to keep things easy. Wednesday will be your quality day or your speed day. That's where you're going to put in that threshold workout that we talked about before, that lactic threshold workout. Thursday and Friday are easier days. Focus on easy pace. And then Saturday, and depending what day you do your long run, it could be Sunday. But your weekend is typically your long run. So if you follow that training cycle and you keep things consistent like that, you're going to get the gains that you need to get. Now, here's some examples of what the different kinds of speed work would be. So threshold days. So remember, your threshold pace is a little bit faster than your marathon pace, but not quite to like 5K, 10K pace. So a good example workout would be something like 3 by 2 miles, or for our metric friends, 3 by 3 kilometers. So what you do with this workout is you'd warm up 1 or 2 miles. you'd go into these interval sessions, I guess you can say, where you do 2 miles at that threshold pace. Remember, that would be 7:30 to 7:40 per mile, or about 4:40 to 4:47 per kilometer. Um, you're going to do the 2 miles or the 3K, and then you're going to want to do no more than 2 to 3 minutes of recovery. You're going to get through that recovery of active recovery, and then you're going to hop in and do another rep. And you're going to do that 3 times. And at the end, you'll do a cool down as well. Another workout that I really, really love are mile intervals or mile repeats, or for our metric friends, 2K repeats. So same thing, you do a warm up, you go into the mile effort at lactic threshold pace, and then you'd take 2 to 3 minutes recovery, and then you hop in again. And you do that whole thing and then end with a cool down. Now let's talk about the other kind of speed work, the speed work that you're going to do during your long runs. Now, like I said, not every long run is going to have speed work in it, but probably a good chunk of them will to some capacity. So one of the most common and kind of blanket workouts you're going to do for marathon training, especially for a 3:30 marathon, is you're going to do some chunk of distance at marathon pace. So you could be anywhere from 6 miles at marathon pace up to 12 miles at marathon pace. So another kind that I really recommend is doing a progression run. So a progression run is where you start easier. You start at a real slow pace. I shouldn't say slow, a more conversational, easy pace, and you gradually progress faster as the run goes on. So by the end of the run, you're going at least marathon pace, maybe a little bit faster, depending on how you're feeling. And then the third one is just a little different, but what you can do is you'd warm up and then you'd do 2 or 3 miles or kilometers or whatever at marathon pace early in the run, just to get your legs moving, get your heart racing. And then you're going to go easy or go marathon pace throughout the rest of that run. And then at the end of the run, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to do 2 miles or a handful of kilometers at marathon pace at the end of the run. What this kind of workout does is it simulates running hard early and then having to run hard later, but you're still getting a good chunk of easy mileage in the middle of it. So, how should I pace myself on race day? Well, here is something that all runners need to develop a skill set to be able to do is you need to be able to adapt to the circumstances around you. So on race day, first and foremost, you need to know the course. If it's a hilly course, you're going to want to adapt your pacing strategies with that. If it's a downhill course, you're also going to run a little bit different on a downhill course. I recently ran a downhill marathon where we dropped about 4,000 feet in the first 20 miles, and then it was pancake flat with rolling hills towards the end, the last 10K. The other thing that you really need to focus on is weather. So I come from Florida. I'm currently living in Utah. So I've run marathons in both states. And in my opinion, humidity is so much harder to run a marathon in than altitude. If you agree with that, hit the thumbs up button below, leave a comment down below. But know the weather. If it's great conditions, you could usually let the leash go a little bit. If it's not good conditions, you're going to want to keep that in the back of your head. If it's really humid, if it's hot, if it's too cold, if it's windy, rainy, whatever, you're going to want to take that into consideration. Kind of piggybacking off of that is you want to be able to know your nutrition and your hydration. If it's really hot, you're going to be taking more fluids and more substance on. If it's really cold, you're probably going to want to adapt just a little bit. You're also going to want to figure out where and when to take um, those those gels, those goos, whatever you're taking. You're going to want to figure out where you're going to take it. And then last and not least is recognize how you feel. If you're feeling great, keep going. However, don't push the gas too early because in a marathon, the marathon can be very unforgiving. And I think the majority of people, if you've run a marathon, you understand that. But just be smart and recognize how you feel. So, my biggest advice with how to pace yourself on race day is train like you race and race like you train. Meaning, if you're training in conditions that are worse than what race day is going to be like, great. When you get to race day, you're going to feel awesome. If you're training, for example, if you're training in Utah where it's really dry and you're going to run a marathon and where it's really humid, you're probably going to want to be able to adapt a little bit because that's going to be a big change on the body. And that is how to break 3:30 in the marathon. Like I said at the beginning of the video, in the description down below, there's a special link that will take you to a page where you can claim your training plan voucher that's made specifically for a sub 3:30 marathon. So go down to the link, grab that training voucher, be sure to hit that subscribe button, smash that thumbs up button, and we will see you in the next video.